Well, welcome to Community Forum. My name is John Gogliettino. I'm your host. This evening I'm going to be speaking with Jason Bartlett, who's the state representative from the 2nd District here in Danbury, Bethel, and Reading. I've known Jason for a while, and he's involved in a very interesting race. So welcome again to the show.
Great to be here, John. Thank you.
Before we get into our questions, if you can tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into this particular job, and you know, where you came from, educational background, whatever you'd like to say.
Sure. Well, I'm the hometown candidate in this race. I grew up in Reading and graduated from the Reading schools, Joe Barlow High School, went to UConn, eventually came back to the area, started up a small business on Greenwood Avenue in Bethel, doing mortgages and finance, and raised my 2 kids there, and just been really a part of Greater Danbury for all my life. And the seat opened up in 2001, 2002, and I was just like, you know, this really matches with my life experience, and I'd like to give back to the community, so I decided to run. Was victorious 2 elections ago, and you know, just trying to continue some of the work that I started at this point in this re-election effort. Education reform has been my niche. I've done a lot of work in the public health area with Lyme disease and that kind of thing. And, you know, I think that we have a huge challenge going forward in terms of creating jobs in the state of Connecticut, as well as taking care of a pretty big budget deficit of $3.5 billion. And I think that I have the right priorities and the right values going forward in terms of representing this district and doing what's in the people's best interests.
Okay. I was going to get into other questions, but okay.
Well, we can go back to all those.
We'll cover those. But how's the campaign going? You know, we're about a week away from the election at this point in time,
yeah.
And you've got to, you know, you've done a certain amount of walking and talking, and
right.
What are people, you know, talking about? Let's put it that way.
Well, at the beginning of the summer, I think people were really ramped up. I think that was the height of the Tea Party experience that we're having here in the country.
That's the way I describe it.
Yeah. And, you know, people, you know, it's been interesting because people are upset with Washington, D.C., and upset with kind of some national politics. But they knew me, you know, as somebody who's really brought money back to the district, somebody who's really looked out for their interests as taxpayers, somebody who's, you know, just been working hard and doing, you know, what I do in Hartford. So there was some differentiation. Now I think that, you know, people are looking at where do we want to take the state and where do we want to take the country, and it seemed to, you know, we've had this huge Blumenthal-McMahon battle. And
so awareness, you know,
the gubernatorial thing, awareness is up, and people are educating themselves and saying, you know, Connecticut is very sophisticated, and people split a lot. So I think the anger is gone, and people are looking at the candidates and kind of deciding who they like, why they like them. I think the Democratic Party is in a much better position, and I feel that I'm in a very good position because, you know, my opponent hasn't offered any new ideas. He has a very thin resume. You know, he hasn't done anything in terms of the community, in terms of community service since he's been in Bethel. And
how long has he been in Bethel?
He says he's been in Bethel for about 6 years, and he lived in Reading prior to that. And you have to go back to when he was in Reading. He served for 1 year on Parks and Rec. So you're almost going back, you know, 8-something years since he's been active in the community. And while I welcome, and I think he's made me a better candidate, and certainly we've had an energized race, you know, he hasn't really demonstrated what his political philosophy is or his commitment to the people of the district. So, you know, I think I have a reservoir of goodwill. I think I'm thought of as an independent thinker and person. I don't always go with my caucus, quite frankly. I've had you call me up, I think, on a couple of occasions to ask me not to go with my caucus. So, I think people get that, We had an epic battle in Bethel with Bob Burke, former first selectman, and myself, because I was protecting Danbury folks, and he didn't like that. I fought to preserve land, Terre Haute in Danbury. I was just up at Old Lantern, walking that neighborhood and trying to remind folks, you know what, I suffered politically in Bethel because, Bob Burke was going crazy because I was saying that we should preserve open space here in Danbury, that it was good for both communities, and, remind people of how hard I've worked and who I had to go against my own first selectman. So
environmental issues is an important thing for you.
Well, it has been, yes. I think, we look at development in both Danbury and Bethel. It's been a huge, in Reading, quite frankly, huge issues. I remember when I first ran, people were very upset in Danbury about the zoning and, throwing multifamilies up and splitting these lots, and we've talked about that. And in Bethel, the same thing in terms of affordable housing and allowing developers to come in and take the land. So open space has been a huge priority for me. And I've been very successful. I've brought in over 200 acres into the district on my watch, and I have another 200 acres that we'd like to consummate the deal between the mayor of Danbury and the first selectman of Bethel, and I think after this election we'll be able to do that.
Okay. What other issues, you mentioned health care as being, what are some of the things you've done, and I know that you're trying to phase in some other parts, but talk about how Connecticut citizens have been, their lives have been improved, because I know from my end, the benefits in Connecticut are much better than across the country. We've already, the Connecticut legislature has already done a lot of things for our citizenry here.
Well, the first thing that we did that I liked was the fact that, and the feds have copied this idea as one of the ideas that I think both sides agree to, and that is allowing our kids to stay on our insurance policies. I have, a 21-year-old and a 23-year-old staying on until they're 26. And so that was something that I proposed right off the bat, because kids, they're not really kids, young adults don't always understand that they should have health insurance. They want to save that premium and go without, and then when they get sick it becomes a potential catastrophe for the family.
Prior it was 19, I believe, and 21 if you were
in school. In college, right.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that we did right off the bat. We have been fighting for small businesses in terms of health care. I've been steadfast in terms of my support to allow small businesses to buy into the state's plan. We've also created Sustenance, which will also allow for that, allow nonprofits to buy in, and kind of looking at the whole state to perhaps integrate with whatever the federal reform is. We are in a good position in the state of Connecticut that we should be one of the first states to be able to integrate with federal reform.
The pooling is going to be very easy to do in 2014 when the full effect of the law kicks in.
Right. And we'll have a report for Sustenance in January. We'll take a look at that, make modifications going forward. So it'll be a very interesting, obviously we're going to have a new governor, but it'll be very interesting, and I think will be good for small businesses in particular in terms of health care. Met with the realtors just this week, and they're all 1099, and they've always had a very difficult time trying to secure health insurance for themselves. And these two vehicles that I just discussed will allow folks that are 1099 and/or self-employed to actually get decent health care.
Yeah, because as individuals, if they had problems, they'd have a heck of a time getting coverage.
Right.
So, this makes it easier. And like I said, Connecticut has been ahead of the curve.
We're going to have to do something. I mean, Anthem came through with like a 40% increase on individuals. And they did that because of pre-existing conditions. If you had one, they're trying to project going forward. So, there are a lot of advocates are calling for the head of the insurance commissioner, and that may be justified to some extent, but at the same time, I understand the thinking, and that's why we got to create pools for
if you
people,
have the pools.
and you've got to bring everybody together. You can't allow people to stand out on an individual policy and think that,
if you have
it's
10
gonna
companies, if you got 10 companies doing business in Connecticut, they all have to participate in the pool. And that's how the pooling works. And then you won't have those drastic increases from some as opposed to the others.
So that's where we have to get to. So I think healthcare in the state is a work in progress. My big issue in terms of health and insurance and that kind of thing has been in Lyme disease. I have a bill that was actually proposed and passed that's been copied by 4 other states that says that there is such a thing as chronic Lyme disease, basically. There is no gold standard. A lot of people get the rash, but not everyone does. And even a blood test does not always determine if you have a positive, Lyme disease. So if you don't realize it until 6 months or a year or 2 years down the road, like many people, some will get Bell's palsy or whatever, then you might need more than 4 weeks of antibiotics. And there's a group of doctors that say, there's no such thing as chronic Lyme. You get 4 weeks of antibiotics and we're done. And the Department of Public Health was actually investigating doctors for prescribing more than 4 weeks for Lyme. And, some of our neighbors have had, real debilitating effects from that. So we did legislation, and I wrote legislation that got passed that says you can't do that. If you need 6 months of antibiotics, then that's between you and your patient. And so I'm very proud of that and proud of my work that I've done on public health in that area, in that particular area.
Okay. Now, what do you say to the arguments on the budget that our budget, wrecks small business, or I mean, there's things
the
out there
today.
Yeah. If Democrats are tax and spend, I think what we've had in this state is we have a lot of bonding and spending. You know what I'm saying? When I hear some of the stuff on the budgets, I'm very skeptical about it. Having been in government in the past.
Well, I'll tell you this. So my opponent, the problem with, I think, some of the Republican House folks that are running this year is they have no solutions, no new ideas, and a lot of sloganeering. Let's help small business, but they don't have a proposal. Okay, I had a proposal and got through a proposal, and we actually did something for small businesses in terms of creating jobs and looking out for them. Every small business going forward that creates a job gets a $200 tax credit every single month for the rest of the year. Every business that creates 10 jobs will get that, and they will get a 60% certificate on payroll for all of those new jobs. So 60% of the payroll, they'll get a tax credit for that and be able to write that off. Those are actual things that we did. I actually proposed the payroll credit as a freshman 4 years ago for companies that were doing 20 jobs. We've now taken it down to 10. So these are proposals to help small businesses, to incentivize them to create jobs, to make it work for them.
Those are credits on the Connecticut income tax, or?
Yep. Yeah. And the corporate one is on the corporate. The one for the payroll is on their corporate tax. Okay, so it's whether you're an S or a C or an LLC, somehow you're going to reap the. It's flexible so that if you're an S, for example, you can apply that towards your personal, depending on how you do your taxes. So this is something that's going to help create jobs. This is makes sense. They have nothing to propose. My opponent is sending out mail saying I'm against small businesses because I was against the business entity tax, getting rid of it. But that's $40 or more million, okay, that it would cost the state of Connecticut in an environment where we have a $3.5 billion deficit. So although I would like to remove that, how do you remove a tax like that that's not going to create any jobs and add to the deficit? So, you have to have an honest conversation. And that's just not what's happening. So that's the problem with, my opponent is, he's giving away, this tax cut and that tax cut to everybody, not creating any jobs, adding to the deficit, and then there's no proposals about how do we control spending. I'm actually the only candidate in this race that's actually come forward and said what the cuts are, or what they should be. I've talked about consolidating public safety and homeland security. I've talked about actually eliminating...
That makes sense.
You think?
Yeah.
Eliminating consumer protection, which, as a Democrat, I think is a pretty courageous position. But you know what? Our Attorney General does the advocacy for consumers in the state, so why not just give him the responsibility in full? Licensing home contractors, guess who else licenses business? The Secretary of the State, so let's give her that piece. And they also go to restaurants and things and do like a certain public health service with toys and things like that. Well, that should go to the Department of Public Health. So it is a duplicative agency with lots of administrators, lots of bureaucracy. Close it down, send off, and this is my proposal. He's got nothing. I believe, too, that, the State Employees Union has to come to the table and, give up some concessions on health care, that the pension program has to be revamped.
Pay a little more on the copays.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, these are things that I've said as Vice Chair of Appropriations. I came up with a list of $300 million in not appropriated funds in terms of cuts. We cut $3 billion in the last 2 years in the budget. The last budget that we did had no tax increases. So, they're pretending, using the national, climate, and, basically every state took a hit in terms of the national economy, in terms of a deficit. So they're pretending as if, they're going to somehow do something different, but we don't know what the difference that they're proposing is. And so I think that's the clear difference, is that I have a record, I've made hard decisions, and in terms of priorities, I think I have the right priorities.
I forgot to ask you what committees you were on. So I should have known you're an appropriation person, but I lose track with all
No,
the
it's okay. I'm on appropriations.
Stuff.
I'm on education, which is, I'm very big education advocate across the state, and doing education reform, and the public health, which is why I worked on Lyme disease and those kinds of issues.
Well, let's talk about education, since we've covered the other two somewhat. Okay. What have you been doing, again, specifically on the reform? Because, I was a little disturbed. There was some reform that was carried out in Washington, D.C., and then I guess the chair of the Board of Education is leaving because it looks like they want to go a little bit back on the reforms. And it didn't seem like it was a bad deal, some of the things that were done, consolidating some of the schools, and,
Well, I mean, it's a hot topic, but it's something that needs to happen. I mean, one of the things that I hope everyone understands in terms of my advocacy is that I believe that we have to reform the failing schools in the state of Connecticut within existing resources. So, as much as I am an education advocate, I'm not asking for any more dollars. I believe that the dollars are there, and we have to create the reform. And that's been my message for the last 2 years. And sometimes I've had to stand alone in terms of saying that, because I am a Democrat, and some folks don't like to hear that. But I think that that's an appropriate message, and it's the right message. We have failing schools in Danbury. We have 184 failing schools in the state of Connecticut. We have to do things differently. So I did a bill, and I authored major parts of this bill that basically had about 10 pieces to it. I said we have to have school governance councils in every school that's failing. What is that? That's parents elected by parents, teachers elected by teachers, sitting together, working together. The administration only gets an ex officio role, and these governance councils will have all kinds of powers within the school. Their voices will be heard within that school system. And I think that if you look at systematic failure in urban cities, you don't have parental voices. You don't have parental empowerment. Their number one charge is getting the parents involved in that school. And that's where we need to start. That was one. Two was we rolled out online, okay, alternative learning environments. It's $300 to have your kid do Mandarin Chinese or get a credit recovery. How about we allow a kid that failed to do online and recover those credits versus keeping them back for 15 grand and having them repeat, okay? We did advanced placement. 46 high schools didn't have advanced placement. We extended that across the state. Everyone has to offer that. We took the cap off of charters. We don't have enough school choice in Danbury. You know, you've got a high school of over 2,000 kids. The middle schools are at the seams. So a charter school would be a nice option to have here in Greater Danbury, but we couldn't even think about that because we had a cap statewide. So taking the cap off. And probably the most contentious, and you mentioned Michelle Rhee out of D.C., is teachers and teacher evaluations and where are we going with that. And basically, one of the controversial things that we did that I advocated for was saying that student progress, student achievement from grade to grade has to be part of an evaluation. It doesn't have to be all, it doesn't have to be, you know, even 50%, but it's got to be a part of an evaluation. So if you're at third grade and you're at the third grade reading level and you're supposed to be at the fourth at the end of the year, if you're not, that needs to be part of the evaluation. And what the teachers will say is, well, you can't, you know, we have all kinds of demographics and things like, you know, of our kids. You know, maybe there's 5 kids that came from Bridgeport into Danbury and they're at the second grade reading level. Well, I understand and recognize that, and that's why we said we need to have longitudinal data where everybody has a student identifier and we actually know who's in your classroom. So, and where did they go to school before, or what level are they at? So that way, if you have a second grade, a kid at a second grade reading level in the third grade, if he actually makes it to the fourth grade, you get credit for that. You know, if he just makes it to the third grade, then you'd get credit for that. But to not look at that and analyze that, I think is a mistake, and that's what we're not doing. Because somehow we need to know who our master teachers are and have a level for them, and then we also need to know the teachers that are not cutting the grade.
We also need to know when we have too many administrators. For example, the state schools, there was a little piece out, and it says they should have looked at this years ago, even 10 years ago. It never made any sense to me. You have, for example, all of the state universities has a president. Do you really need a local president in all of the state?
I think you do.
Oh, okay.
I'm not going there. I'm not joining. I'm joining in the bandwagon that we can streamline just like every other aspect of government.
Well, you know, I mean, I'm saying
I think Schmatter, for example, for Westcon has been amazing. I think that he needs to be able to. I did a bill for Westcon that brought in that allows Westcon to offer a doctorate in nursing. Okay, nursing, emerging industry. There's not enough nurses. Basically, UConn is doing that, and nobody else. Westcon will have their own program. Now, in order to make that happen,
they need an advocate.
Schmatter needs to go out and get the right people to be able to offer that program.
So he's like the salesperson.
Absolutely. If you think that that's going to happen by going through central office and you know, down in New Britain, it's not going to happen for Danbury. We've done a lot in Danbury at Western Connecticut, and we've been able to do that because we have Schmatter. And I'm sure that Central and Southern are able to do what they do. Each university kind of has a niche. So I don't like the Republicans going around and saying, you know, we don't need a chancellor, we don't need presidents. You know, please. We have institutions of higher learning. You know, people get a degree that's supposed to mean something. We don't need to dumb down our universities. I'm not for that. Now, does that mean that, you know, our chancellor should be making about $350? No. I got a problem with that part. But let's be smart about, you know, how do we downsize the administrative piece. And the other thing is, John, is that what we need to do is, from a state level, we need to have our secondary education go all the way through to higher ed. we probably should have one commissioner that's doing that, because the continuum between, secondary and higher, it doesn't exist in the state. And one of the things we've been working on is to make sure that we carry this all the way through, so that if we do a film tax credit, our community colleges are actually offering the kinds of curricula so that we have people who can get jobs in the film industry, versus we got to import people from out of state who are getting the jobs on that tax credit because nobody is qualified here in the state of Connecticut to do that. And those are the kinds of innovations and things that I'd like to see happen.
We certainly got communication majors. That's another disconnect we seem to have sometimes. Do you have a website where you've got, I'm sure, much of this information?
Well, I use my first name because the Republicans, they spend a lot of money buying Bartlett. They buy all my Bartlett names, so I use Jason08. Oh, no, Jason 2010 this time.
Jason 2010.
2010.com.
So they bought up all the Bartletts.
Oh, they buy up every time. That's one of the things they enjoy doing. I'm happy for them to spend the money. Give GoDaddy all that money.
Interesting. Okay, so that's where they can get information.
Sure.
And is there a telephone number you can be reached at?
You would ask me that. I have to look on my cell phone to tell you what that is.
New telephone, don't know your own telephone number. Okay.
No, I don't. It's 203-826-7126. So that's why we got these things.
Okay, very good. I think we've got about a minute left in summary.
Okay. Well, I hope that folks come out on November 2nd and vote for myself, Jason Bartlett. And also, we need a new governor. And I'd like to see it be Dan Malloy. I think that we can really move transportation and health care and education, and we can deal with this deficit and grow some jobs here with a good Democratic team. And so I hope that folks will pull for Malloy, as well as the other Democrats. I mean, I think that I feel a lot better about Mr. Blumenthal. I'm feeling pretty good about Mr. Murphy. So, let's go there.
They're waving goodbye to me.
Okay.
So, all right, thanks for coming on the show. And thank the viewers for tuning in to the Community Forum. Tune in next week, same time, same station, and we'll see you then. Take care.